Master's in International Law from the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, where I went in order to kind of figure out where I can make the most impact when I went to law school. That experience made me realize I didn't have to go to law school because the rule of law, especially when it comes to international justice, is really controlled by an American-created system. As an American, what this means is that American law is above international justice. So Americans can only be held responsible for international crimes under an American court. This is why we have international crimes under American penal codes. International bodies are forbidden from giving resolve to Americans. We're part of the Convention on Elimination Against All Forms of Racial Discrimination. I'll put the actual name here. So you would think, hey, Black Americans can go to the Inter-American Human Rights Commission and make a complaint about police brutality. No, we're forbidden from doing that. Which really means that we sign treaties even though we know that they technically cannot be used against us. Only the American government and American courts can say that we violated a treaty. And no better example is the fact that we have prosecuted people for what happened in Abu Ghraib, but we have not prosecuted people for what happened in Guantanamo Bay. The difference is evident in the fact that at a certain point, if the United States is incapable of proving that it has a competent independent court, then the international system can have a logic of getting involved. With that said, Venezuela made a referral to the ICC about the unconstitutional kidnapping of Venezuelan residents in the United States and sending them to the gulags in El Salvador. El Salvador is a member of the Rome Statute, so the ICC. The United States is not, which is funny because we led the creation of the ICC through the Rome Statute, but at the end, the United States said, we love this concept, we love that we can hold countries accountable for wrongdoings, but the United States isn't going to be in this, so we didn't sign it. What we use is that because the Constitution is the law of the land, that only American courts can determine whether an American has conducted wrongdoings. What this doesn't mean is that the United States can extend this kind of immunity to other countries like Israel and even El Salvador. The United States believe that it can, because if it doesn't count to the United States, it doesn't count with Israel and El Salvador. That's not how it works. However, what is true is that the international community has only conducted things in accordance to when the United States wanted something done, which means that the United States has held power in conducting and determining international community actions for a long time. And although the international community realizes how problematic this is, it's kind of difficult to change since the United States historically has been the most powerful member and actually the one who economically sustains the international community when it comes to these different organizations, particularly development and human rights. So can the ICC get El Salvador for what's happening? They can get them as much as they can get Israel. Netanyahu literally has an ICC warrant, which means that its protection for these members of the ICC will be as severe. What does this mean for us? Now, I'm not going to say that it's impossible for the ICC to get involved even within the United States. However, if it did that, it would more certainly mean that the United States would go flat in The Hague. The only reality in which that will not be possible is where the Americans actually mobilized in large. Remember, 3.5%, 13 million Americans mobilizing and protesting, demanding for the ICC or for the international community to have oversight over what's occurring in the United States or El Salvador. Think about the Vietnam War. We didn't leave Vietnam because the politicians wanted to leave. It was because Americans stood up and went against it. And ultimately, something like this would also push back against the anti-protest attacks that have been happening under this administration, but also under Biden. Because the argument was that if you are protesting and it will affect negatively the foreign policy of the United States, then the government can remove your right to protest, right? Your right to speech. Which is untrue, because we the people is Americans in the United States. That is not Israel. That is not our friends and our foreign government. So ultimately, the only reality where the ICC can get involved in a way that will force the United States anyway will be Americans demanding for ICC or international involvement. Now, obviously, if you call your representatives to Congress, they will say, well, we can't do that. That's just impossible, which it kind of is in this moment, but that doesn't mean that it's impossible because we cannot legally do it. It's because the players that we have in Congress refuse to do it because they won't want to give any sort of supremacy over anything else above America. That is American exceptionalism, right? We don't need anyone babysitting us. We do, but that's their argument, right? So if you call them and you tell them, they're going to tell you the same thing when you say, why didn't you invoke Amendment 14, Section 3? Because we wanted a peaceful transfer of power. They're going to give you answers that they know are technically true, but ultimately it's because they don't want to push further. So if any of you want any actual action from the ICC, you have to mobilize Americans in bulk to demand it. Because in no reality will the ICC or any international community get involved without the United States government literally flattening them. Because we have legalities that forbid it. Now that can change, so it's not impossible, but it's going to require you and Americans pressuring the government to, hey, we don't trust that you're doing this. We don't trust in the courts anymore because they're corrupt, which is true. Then we need something that is bipartisan and not involved within our reality so that they can actually hold the responsible parties accountable. But this is going to require so much more protests and so much more demands, which I'm not saying is bad, but I'm saying you're gonna have to be strong. It's like Vietnam. We didn't want to leave Vietnam as a government, but we did because the people didn't stop. And that's what we have to consider. For any other entity that isn't American to get involved, it has to come from us, from the American people. Because what's stronger than the American government? Not the international community. At least not right now. It is the American people. So it starts with you. It starts with me. Because otherwise, sure, they can send some criminal punishment to El Salvador like they did to Netanyahu, but what did that do? Our government has a influence in making sure that there's impunity to the people that they befriend, like Israel and El Salvador. So now reality has to be Americans saying, no, we want foreign intervention when it comes to our reality because we don't trust that this government is independent enough to actually fix this.